The champagne flute was still in Claire Danvers' hand when the string quartet stopped playing. She stood at the back of the white tent, uninvited, unannounced, wearing a navy dress that suddenly felt like armor. 200 guests turned to look at the bride. Nobody noticed the woman standing near the exit, nobody except one man. Robert Ashford, 71 years old, leaning on a cane he didn't need 6 months ago, moved through the crowd like a man walking toward a verdict. He passed his son Daniel, who stood at the altar in a charcoal suit, smiling the smile Claire used to believe was only hers. He passed the bride, radiant in ivory silk, veil lifted, laughing at something a bridesmaid whispered. The bride was Melissa Cross, Claire's best friend for 11 years, maid of honor at Claire's own wedding, 6 years earlier in this same garden under this same oak tree. Robert reached Claire before anyone else registered she was there. He gripped her wrist not gently and pulled her half a step behind a marble pillar out of the sightline of the altar. His hand was trembling, but his eyes were sharp, focused, urgent in a way Claire had never seen from her calm, controlled former father-in-law. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly, and for a second she thought that was the whole warning. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to something almost inaudible beneath the music starting again behind them. "You don't know, do you?" Claire's mouth went dry. "Know what, Robert?" He glanced toward the altar, toward his son, toward the woman in white who used to braid Claire's hair during finals week in college, who used to say, "I'd never let anyone hurt you." "They think it's over," Robert said. "It isn't, not for you, not for Emma." Emma, her daughter, the reason Claire had signed away half her life 8 months ago without reading every page. Before Claire could ask another question, a hand touched Robert's shoulder. His nurse, a young woman in scrubs, stepped between them with an apologetic look. "Mr. Ashford, your medication, we need to go inside." Robert didn't fight her. He let himself be led away, but his eyes stayed locked on Claire the entire time, and his lips moved one more time silent, but Claire could read them clearly. "Ask the lawyer, ask the real one." Claire stood frozen behind the pillar as the quartet swelled and Daniel Ashford took Melissa Cross's hands in front of 200 witnesses. Somewhere behind that music was an answer Claire didn't have yet, and a question that would not let her sleep again until she found it. What didn't she know? If stories like this keep you up wondering what you'd do in her place, hit subscribe now, because this one has more turns than you're expecting, and you don't want to miss where it goes. 8 months earlier, Claire's biggest problem had been picking out a school for Emma. She and Daniel had built something that looked, from the outside, like the version of adulthood people envy. A colonial house in Ashford Grove, the town practically named for Daniel's family. A seat on the board of Ashford Textiles, the company Daniel's grandfather founded and Robert had grown into a $200 million operation. A 6-year-old daughter with Daniel's dimples and Claire's stubborn chin. And Melissa, always Melissa, at every dinner, every holiday, every 2 a.m. phone call when Claire needed to vent about Daniel working too late again. "You're lucky to have her," Daniel used to say. "Most women don't have a best friend who actually likes their husband." Claire used to agree. She'd laugh and say Melissa was the sister she never had. The suspicious detail arrived quietly, the way most warnings do, easy to explain away, easy to file under nothing. It was a Tuesday. Claire came home early from a doctor's appointment and found Melissa's car in the driveway, though Daniel wasn't supposed to be home until 7. Through the kitchen window she saw them both, close together at the counter, Daniel's hand resting on Melissa's lower back as she leaned over a laptop. They startled apart when Claire walked in. "Quarterly reports," Daniel said too fast. "Melissa's helping me prep for the board meeting." Melissa smiled, easy, warm, the same smile she'd worn since college. "Your husband works too hard. Somebody has to keep him organized." Claire believed it. Melissa had an MBA and consulted for half the businesses in Ashford Grove. It made sense. It made perfect, reasonable sense. She didn't think about it again for weeks. She had a company charity gala to plan, a daughter's kindergarten interview to prep for, a marriage that still on paper and in practice looked entirely intact. Daniel still kissed her goodbye every morning. He still called during his lunch break most days just to hear about Emma's afternoon. If something had shifted underneath the surface of their life, Claire had no compass pointed toward it yet. There was one more moment, small enough that she almost forgot it entirely. At a company holiday party 2 months before the divorce, Claire overheard Melissa on the phone in the hallway outside the coat check, her voice low and clipped in a tone Claire had never heard her use before. "Just hold the timeline," Melissa was saying. "Nothing moves until the valuation's locked. I told you that already." When Melissa noticed Claire behind her, she smiled instantly, apologized for boring vendor talk, and looped their arms together to walk back into the party. Claire let it go. She had no reason yet to believe her best friend was speaking in code. She didn't think about any of it again until 4 months later, when Daniel sat her down in the living room and said the word she never expected to hear from him. "I want a divorce." No affair confession, no explanation beyond. "I don't think we make each other happy anymore, Claire. I think we both deserve better." She was too stunned to fight, too proud to beg, and when the papers arrived, Melissa was the one who held her hand through every signature. "I know a great family lawyer," Melissa had said, squeezing Claire's fingers across a kitchen table stacked with documents. "Let me handle finding him. You don't need to deal with more stress than you're already under." The lawyer's name was Preston Cole. Claire met him twice. He was polished, sympathetic, and moved fast, almost too fast, though Claire didn't have the bandwidth at the time to question why her own attorney kept rushing her toward signatures instead of slowing her down. She walked away from the marriage with the house, partial custody, and what Cole called a fair settlement from her interest in Ashford Textiles stock. She didn't walk away with the truth, not yet. The first crack came 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, when Claire's accountant called about a discrepancy in her portfolio. "Your Ashford Textiles shares," he said. "The valuation used in the settlement, it's off, significantly off." "Off how?" "The company did a private restructuring 6 weeks before your settlement was finalized. Your shares should have been valued at almost triple what you were paid out. Did your attorney not flag this?" Claire's stomach turned to ice. He said the number was standard. He said it matched Daniel's disclosure. "Whoever signed off on that disclosure," her accountant said carefully, "either didn't do their job or didn't want to." Claire called Preston Cole's office that afternoon. The receptionist told her almost cheerfully that Mr. Cole no longer practiced family law. He'd taken a corporate counsel position at a firm 2 states away. A firm, Claire would later discover through a single Google search that made her hands shake, retained as outside counsel for Ashford Textiles the very same month her divorce was finalized. Her own lawyer had been quietly on her ex-husband's peril before the ink dried. Claire spent that night going through every document from her divorce, spreading them across the dining room table like evidence in a case she hadn't known she was building. She found things she'd been too exhausted to question the first time around. A signature line that had been pre-marked with sticky tabs, getting her hand to sign quickly without reading the paragraph above it. An appraisal report with a date that didn't match the cover letter. A clause limiting her right to challenge the settlement after 90 days. A clause Melissa had specifically told her was completely standard, "Don't worry about it," when Claire had hesitated over it at the kitchen table. She thought of Melissa's voice at the kitchen table, "Let me handle finding him." The question was no longer whether something had gone wrong in her divorce. The question was how far back the plan went, and who else had been in on it. Claire didn't confront Melissa right away. She'd learned in 6 months of silence that confrontation without proof only gets you gaslit, so she watched instead. She noticed the timeline first. Daniel and Melissa's engagement had been announced only 5 months after the divorce finalized, not the frantic scramble of 2 people who'd fallen suddenly and inconveniently in love, the smooth, rehearsed rollout of 2 people who'd been planning something for a long time. She pulled old calendar invites from a shared cloud account she and Daniel had never fully separated. Buried in the metadata were meeting names Claire had never noticed before. MC Q3 review, repeating almost weekly, going back nearly 2 years before the divorce. 2 years, Melissa had been meeting privately with Daniel for 2 years before he ever mentioned wanting out. Claire sat with that for 3 sleepless nights before she called the one person who might actually answer honestly. Robert Ashford picked up on the second ring, his voice softer over the phone than she remembered it in person. "Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." A long pause. "I've been waiting for this call. Did you know about Daniel and Melissa before the divorce?" Robert exhaled slowly. "I suspected. I didn't have proof until it was already too late to matter to you. I'm sorry, Claire, I should have said something the moment I saw it. I told myself it wasn't my place. And now, at the wedding you said I didn't know something. What is it? Not on the phone, Robert said. Come to the house Thursday. Daniel and Melissa are flying to the coast for their honeymoon. We'll have the afternoon. Bring a notepad, Claire. Bring your accountant's number too, you're going to want both. That Thursday changed everything Claire thought she understood about her own life. Robert met her in his study, the same room where Claire used to sit during holiday visits, sipping wine while Daniel and his father argued gently about business strategy. Robert looked thinner than he had at the wedding, his hands unsteady as he slid a folder across the desk. I have pancreatic cancer, he said before Claire could ask why he looked so different. Stage 3, 6 months, maybe less if the treatment doesn't take. Robert, don't, he said gently. I don't have time to be comforted. I have time to fix what I let happen to you, and I need you clear-headed to help me do it. He opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, emails, and a document Claire recognized instantly, the shareholder valuation used in her divorce settlement. Melissa didn't marry my son for love, Robert said. She married him for control of 31% of Ashford Textiles, the block that would have gone to you and eventually to Emma. She and Daniel restructured the company's valuation right before your settlement, specifically to undervalue your shares. Cole signed off because we paid his new firm $200,000 to make sure he did. Claire's hands were shaking now too. Why would Daniel do that to me, to his own daughter's mother? Robert's jaw tightened. Because Melissa found out something about Daniel 4 years ago, something that could have ended his career and possibly sent him to prison. Instead of exposing him, she used it. She's been controlling him ever since. What did she find? Robert slid a second document across the desk, an internal audit, dated 4 years earlier, flagged and then quietly buried. Daniel diverted almost $4 million from a supplier contract into a shell account. Melissa was consulting for us at the time. She found the discrepancy before our internal auditors did. Instead of reporting it, she went to Daniel privately. She blackmailed him. She built a partnership on top of a blackmail, Robert said. And the price of her silence was your marriage, your shares, and eventually his name on a marriage license instead of yours. Claire sat back, feeling something in her chest that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite rage, something sharper, colder, more useful than either. If you were sitting across that desk right now, learning your best friend engineered your entire divorce for a stake in a company, what would you do first? Type your answer below, because what Claire does next might surprise you. Claire didn't cry when she left Robert's house. She didn't call Daniel screaming, didn't post anything online, didn't confront Melissa at brunch. She went home, sat at her kitchen table and made a list. Point 1. The fraudulent valuation used in her settlement was provable, with her accountant's documentation and the internal audit Robert had given her. Point 2. Preston Cole's conflict of interest, representing her while quietly negotiating employment with her husband's company, was a bar complaint-worthy breach of legal ethics, possibly criminal. Point 3. The $4 million embezzlement Daniel had committed 4 years earlier was still, as far as Robert knew, unreported to authorities. Melissa's silence had been protecting a felony. Point 4. The one that mattered most, none of it touched Emma unless Claire let it. She hired a new attorney the next morning, a forensic litigator named Renata Ibarra, who specialized in exactly this kind of quiet, corporate cruelty. She hired a private investigator to build a clean paper trail on the shell account, and she reached out to 2 members of the Ashford Textiles board who had, over the years, quietly trusted her judgment more than Daniel's. For 6 weeks, Claire built her case in silence while Melissa and Daniel settled into married life, unaware the ground beneath them had already begun to shift. They found out sooner than Claire wanted. It started with a call from Daniel, his voice edged with something between confusion and threat. Renata Ibarra reached out to our corporate counsel asking questions about a supplier contract from 4 years ago. Care to explain, Claire? I think you know why, she said calmly. You're going to destroy this family over paperwork, over money you never even understood. I understood it well enough to notice it was stolen from me. The next attack wasn't from Daniel. It was from Melissa, who showed up at Claire's house unannounced 2 days later, mascara perfect, voice trembling in a performance Claire recognized instantly, because she'd seen Melissa cry on command at least a dozen times over 11 years of friendship. "I never meant to hurt you," Melissa said. "I fell in love with him, that's all this ever was." "You met with him weekly for 2 years before he asked me for a divorce," Claire said. "You helped pick my divorce lawyer knowing he'd been bought. You knew about the valuation fraud. Don't stand in my kitchen and call it love." Melissa's expression shifted, the softness draining out like water from a cracked glass. "You have no idea what you're about to do to Emma. Do you know what a public scandal does to a 6-year-old? Custody lawyers will use every headline against you. Judges don't like women who look vindictive, Claire. Think very carefully before you pull this thread." It was, Claire realized later, the most honest thing Melissa had said all afternoon, not a denial but a threat disguised as concern. 2 weeks after that, Claire's custody arrangement was challenged in court. Daniel's new legal team, paid for with money that used to belong partly to Claire, filed a motion alleging she was emotionally unstable and engaged in a retaliatory vendetta against the family. They cited her private investigators' inquiries as evidence of obsession, not diligence. Melissa escalated further than Claire expected. She began reaching out to mutual friends in Ashford Grove, framing the story as a bitter ex-wife who couldn't accept her ex-husband's happiness and was now weaponizing a dying man's confusion to steal a fortune from his own family. A few of those friends stopped answering Claire's calls. One sent her a text that read simply, "I think you need to let this go, for Emma's sake." Claire saved it. Renata told her every piece of it might matter later, and she was right to keep it. Daniel tried a softer approach once, showing up at Claire's door on a Sunday evening alone, asking if they could talk like adults. He told her he never wanted things to get this ugly, that Melissa had gotten carried away with the lawyers, that if Claire dropped the custody challenge, he'd make sure she was taken care of financially, quietly outside of court. It was, Claire realized, an offer to buy her silence a second time. She closed the door without answering. For the first time since Robert's whisper at the wedding, Claire felt real fear, not for herself, but for Emma, caught in the middle of a war she never should have inherited. Renata Ibarra didn't flinch. "This is what people do when they're losing," she told Claire over the phone. "They make noise to distract from the evidence. Stay quiet, let the paperwork speak." Then, 3 weeks before the custody hearing, Robert Ashford called Claire himself, his voice weaker than it had been in his study, but unmistakably resolute. "I've rewritten my will," he said. "I'm placing my controlling shares of Ashford Textiles, the 31% Melissa married Daniel to get near, into an irrevocable trust for Emma. You'll serve as trustee until she turns 25. Daniel and Melissa get nothing from my estate, not one share." "Robert, they'll fight it. They'll say you weren't of sound mind." "I know," Robert said. "Which is why I already had 2 independent physicians and my longtime estate attorney document my competency on video, dated and notarized 3 days ago. I've been planning this since the week after your divorce finalized. I just needed the proof to be airtight before I moved. Melissa is smart, Claire. I wasn't going to give her a single crack to exploit." It was the twist Claire hadn't seen coming, the one that flipped the entire board. The man everyone assumed was a dying bystander had, in fact, been the quiet architect of her way out from the very beginning. But there was no time to feel relief, because 2 days after Robert filed the trust paperwork, Melissa filed an emergency petition to have Robert declared mentally incompetent, citing his terminal diagnosis, his medications, and erratic decision-making inconsistent with the family's long-term interests. The hearing to determine Robert's competency was scheduled for the same week as Claire's custody hearing. Melissa wasn't just trying to protect her marriage anymore. She was trying to seize the entire fortune before Robert died, and she was moving fast enough that even Claire's legal team looked worried for the first time in the whole fight. The next 10 days would decide everything: Emma's future, Robert's legacy, and whether the truth would come out before Melissa buried it for good. Stick around because the final confrontation is coming, and it does not go the way you're expecting. The morning of the competency hearing, the courtroom was half full. Ashford Textiles board members in one row, Daniel and Melissa's legal team whispering at their table, Claire and Renata seated calmly at theirs. Robert arrived in a wheelchair, thinner than the last time Claire had seen him, but his eyes were clear and sharp, the same eyes that had found her behind a marble pillar months ago. Melissa's attorney opened aggressively, citing Robert's diagnosis, his pain medication dosages, a handful of confused moments logged by hospice staff during a rough week of treatment 3 months earlier. Then Renata stood, calm as still water, and played the notarized video. On the screen, Robert Ashford sat in this very study, lucid, precise, answering complex questions from 2 independent physicians about corporate structure, family history, and the specific reasoning behind every provision in his revised will. He named every grandchild by birth date. He recited from memory the founding year of Ashford Textiles and 3 of its largest supplier contracts. He explained in full legal detail why he was excluding his son. "My son embezzled $4 million from this company 4 years ago," Robert said on the recording, his voice steady. "His new wife discovered it and used it to control him instead of reporting it, and together they defrauded my former daughter-in-law of a fair divorce settlement. I am of entirely sound mind, and I am choosing, deliberately, to protect my granddaughter from both of them." The courtroom went silent. Melissa's attorney tried to object, but the judge had already seen enough. The embezzlement claim, once spoken aloud in a courtroom, could not be unheard, and Claire's forensic accountant was next on the witness list, holding 4 years of shell account statements that corroborated every word. Daniel's face across the room had gone the color of old paper. Within an hour, the competency petition was withdrawn, Melissa's attorney recognizing, too late, that fighting it further would only drag his own client's blackmail scheme deeper into the public record. 2 days later, facing the threat of a criminal referral over the embezzlement, Daniel's legal team quietly reached out to Claire's side to negotiate. There was no dramatic speech, no shouting match, no gavel-banging finale. Just a conference room, a settlement agreement, and Daniel Ashford signing away any claim to Emma's trust, agreeing to restitution for the fraudulent divorce valuation, and accepting a plea deal on the embezzlement charge that would keep him out of prison in exchange for full financial disclosure and 5 years of probation. Melissa was written out of the Ashford Textiles Trust entirely. Her consulting contracts with the company, quietly reviewed in the aftermath, were terminated for conflict of interest. The friends she'd cultivated in Ashford Grove society, once so quick to praise her charm, grew distant the moment the story of the blackmail became impossible to ignore. She kept her marriage. She kept nothing else that mattered. Claire never gave a victory speech. She didn't need to. 6 weeks later, Claire sat in Robert's study one final time. He was weaker now, his voice barely above a whisper, but there was peace in his face that hadn't been there at the wedding. "I should have told you the day I suspected them," he said. "I let my son's comfort matter more than your truth for too long. I'm sorry it took me nearly dying to fix that." "You fixed it in time," Claire said, taking his hand. "That's what matters. Emma will have everything she needs, and she'll have you. That's more than I could give my own son in the end." Claire didn't answer. She simply stayed beside him a while longer, the afternoon light falling gold across the study where the truth had finally been spoken out loud. 3 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Claire stood in her kitchen watching Emma color at the same table where a fraudulent settlement had once been signed. Emma looked up, holding out a drawing of 2 stick figures under a bright yellow sun. "That's you and me," Emma said. "I didn't draw anyone else, just us." Claire smiled, and for the first time in almost a year, the silence in that house felt like peace instead of absence. If you made it to the end, you already know Claire didn't win by shouting the loudest. She won by staying quiet, staying patient, and letting the paperwork do the talking. That's the kind of ending we like to tell here. No villain gets away with it, and no one has to lose their dignity to win. If this story kept you hooked till the last line, that's exactly what this channel is built for. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one, because trust me, there's another twist waiting next week that you will not see coming. And before you go, drop a comment and tell me, was it Robert's whisper at the wedding or the MCQ3 review calendar invite that got you? I read every single one. See you in the next story.